Drive across Tennessee from east to west and you will cross Appalachian ridgelines, drop into a limestone basin, and flatten out onto the Mississippi Delta, 3 completely different landscapes in 440 miles. That is farther than New York City to Cleveland, packed inside a single state. Tennessee touches 8 other states, tying Missouri for the most in the country. But the strange part is not the geography. It is that Tennessee is the only state in America that officially admits it. The state constitution divides Tennessee into 3 grand divisions with separate legal requirements. Supreme Court justices must come from each one. And until the 1960s, highway signs welcomed visitors to the 3 states of Tennessee. Most states pretend their internal divides do not exist. Tennessee put its on the flag: 3 stars, 3 worlds, 1 border. Tennessee's outline is the first clue that something is off. It stretches roughly 440 miles east to west, but is narrow enough that you can drive across its width in under 2 hours in places. Its northern border kinks upward into what locals call the Tennessee Chimney, a surveying quirk that cost Kentucky roughly 2,500 square miles and visually reinforces just how strange the state's silhouette really is. 8 states press against its edges: Kentucky and Virginia to the north, North Carolina to the east, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi to the south, Arkansas and Missouri to the west. No straight line geometry here. The border bends, juts, and wanders because it is trying to hold together 3 landscapes that have nothing in common. That 8-state border is not just trivia. It means Tennessee is constantly pressed by outside influences from every direction. Appalachian culture bleeding in from Virginia and North Carolina, Deep South economics pushing up from Mississippi and Alabama, Midwestern trade corridors reaching down from Kentucky and Missouri. No other eastern state absorbs pressure from so many directions at once. The shape itself is a warning that whatever's inside cannot possibly be one thing. Tennessee became the 16th state in 1796, carved from the territory south of the River Ohio. From the beginning, the people who settled its eastern mountains, its central basin, and its western floodplain came through different passes, followed different rivers, and built different economies. The border held them together. The land pulled them apart. You have seen the flag with 3 stars. Now look at the shape that demanded them. 440 miles of state that touches more neighbors than almost any other, because it is trying to contain 3 completely different worlds. Now peel back the outline and look at the land itself. East Tennessee does not spread out, it stretches in lines. Parallel Appalachian ridges run northeast to southwest like the ribs of some buried giant, steering towns, roads, and rivers into narrow corridors. A farmer on one side of a ridge might be 15 minutes from the next valley by crow's flight and an hour by road. Even today, you can stand on a ridge crest in the Great Smoky Mountains and see valley after valley folding away beneath the haze. Each one a pocket world with its own creek, its own church, its own way of doing things. The land favored small holdings, subsistence crops, families who depended on their own labor. Few people here enslaved others, not out of abstract principle, but because the terrain made large-scale agriculture nearly impossible. There was no flat ground for a plantation, no river wide enough to float a cotton bale to market. Communities grew up isolated, self-reliant, and deeply suspicious of any authority that sat more than a day's ride away. Cross the Cumberland Plateau heading west, and the world changes. Middle Tennessee drops into the Nashville Basin, a geological bowl ringed by the Highland Rim, a natural amphitheater of limestone where roads spiral inward and growth concentrates at the center. The soil here is richer, the valleys wider, the connections easier. Different routes converge in the basin like spokes of a wheel. Mixed agriculture took hold: livestock, grain, tobacco. This was not mountain isolation, and it was not plantation country. It was a crossroads, a place built for exchange. Keep driving west, and the land flattens completely. West Tennessee slides into the Mississippi floodplain, where dark alluvial soils run so deep and so fine that cotton fields could stretch unbroken to the horizon. The ground here was deposited by millennia of river floods, rich, black, and endlessly productive in ways the mountain soil could never match. River towns perch on natural levees above the waterline, watching barges float past carrying bales bound for New Orleans and from there to textile mills in Manchester and Lyon. This was plantation country, large-scale agriculture, enslaved labor, and an economy wired directly into the global cotton trade through Memphis and the Mississippi River. The wealth was enormous, and it was built on human bondage at a scale the mountains had never known. 3 landscapes, 3 economies, 3 cultures. And the state did not just tolerate the division, it codified it. The grand divisions are written into the state constitution in statutes. Supreme Court seats are allocated by region. No other state in America formally recognizes itself as 3 separate regions with this level of legal weight. That 440-mile stretch is not just distance. It crosses 3 entirely different geological worlds, and each one built a completely different version of Tennessee. But the moment those differences became impossible to ignore was not about economics or culture. It was about a question that nearly tore the state and the country apart. In February 1861, Tennessee voted against secession. The referendum rejected calling a secession convention by roughly 69,000 to 58,000. Tennessee looked at the growing crisis and said no to the Confederacy. Then Fort Sumter fell. Lincoln called for 75,000 troops to suppress the rebellion and demanded that Tennessee supply its share. For the slaveholding planters of West Tennessee, the choice was clear. They would not send their sons to invade their own economic partners across the Mississippi and Alabama borders. The political ground shifted overnight. A second referendum was held on June 8, 1861. This time the result flipped. Approximately 105,000 for secession, 47,000 against. Tennessee became the last state to join the Confederacy, dragged in by its western and middle sections while the East screamed no. And East Tennessee did not just oppose secession quietly. It held its own conventions to explore seceding from Tennessee itself, a region trying to leave its own state to remain in the Union. Scott County, a remote mountain community near the Kentucky border, literally declared itself the free and independent state of Scott. It operated as a de facto Union enclave for the duration of the war, refusing to recognize the authority of the Confederate government in Nashville. East Tennesseans burned bridges to slow Confederate troop movements, cut telegraph wires, and spied for the North. Confederate authorities responded with martial law, mass arrests, and public hangings meant to terrorize the mountain population into submission. It did not work. This was guerrilla warfare, not against a foreign enemy, but against their own state government, carried out by neighbors against neighbors in the hollows and ridgelines where the terrain made every ambush possible and every pursuit exhausting. The same mountains that had isolated East Tennessee for generations now shielded its resistance. The final numbers tell the whole story. Tennessee supplied roughly 135,000 troops to the Confederacy. It also supplied more than 51,000 to the Union, including over 20,000 black soldiers. More Union soldiers from Tennessee than from any other Confederate state. Both sides fought bitterly over the state's rivers and rail corridors because Tennessee was the gateway to the Western Confederacy, and whoever controlled its passes controlled the war's western front. Tennessee did not pick a side. It picked both sides because the land had already drawn the battle lines generations before the first shot was fired. A state that voted against secession reversed itself, then watched one of its own counties declare independence. A state that fought on both sides of the same war. You would think that is the most extreme contradiction Tennessee ever produced. It is not even close. If you want to understand how geography shapes where Americans live, subscribe. After the war ended, Tennessee became the first seceded state readmitted to the Union, ahead of every other former Confederate state. It was the only state that had joined the rebellion to ratify the 14th Amendment during Reconstruction, the amendment that guaranteed equal protection under law to all citizens. The most progressive post-war posture of any state that had fought for the Confederacy. But Tennessee was also the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. Pulaski, Tennessee, a small town in the south-central part of the state, barely a dot on the map. The year was 1866, just months after the war ended. Former Confederate officers formed the organization in that town, and from there it spread across the South like a virus, terrorizing freedmen, burning schools, and murdering anyone who challenged white supremacy. Night riders in white hoods rode through the same counties where lawmakers had just voted for the 14th Amendment. The most progressive and the most regressive impulses in post-war America, born in the same state, in the same decade, sometimes in the same county. That is not a contradiction that resolves itself. It is a contradiction baked into the soil. This pattern did not stop after Reconstruction. For much of the 20th century, Tennessee was considered moderate by Southern standards, more racially progressive in some ways, more politically competitive between parties than many of its Deep South neighbors. It straddled North and South. It was not a simple red state or blue state. It was a state that contained both impulses in a permanent, uneasy coexistence. And when the political shift finally came, it was dramatic. Over the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Tennessee moved opposite its own trajectory, from moderate swing state to one of the most reliably conservative states in the South. Scholars describe this hard right turn as running parallel to an increase in racial polarization and an erosion of black political power, turning the state into a compressed model of national political realignment. Urban pockets in Memphis, Nashville, and Knoxville lean one direction while the surrounding counties pull hard in the other. The contradictions are not smoothed out, they are sharpened. Tennessee does not just contradict other states, it contradicts itself across time, flipping its own political identity while the geography beneath stays exactly the same. The contradictions are not just historical, they are built into the cities you can drive through today. Memphis grew as a Mississippi River port city. Its economic logic faces south toward the Delta and west toward the world. FedEx built its global superhub here because the city sits at the geographic center of the continent's freight network, not because anyone in Nashville invited them. Every night, hundreds of cargo planes converge on Memphis International, sorting millions of packages before dawn. Memphis behaves less like a Tennessee city and more like a logistics node wired into international trade, its rhythms set by river barges, cargo planes, and the cotton legacy that still echoes through its streets, its blues clubs, and its music. Nashville sits in the basin, that natural crossroads where routes converge from every direction. It became a diversified growth hub. Healthcare corporations, higher education, the music industry, state government, and a booming service economy that pulls resources and people inward like the geological bowl it sits in. Nashville is the rare southern city that reinvented itself without a single dominant industry, and its growth over the past 2 decades has been staggering. Cranes dot the skyline. Neighborhoods that were half empty a decade ago now command rents that would make a Chicagoan wince. The basin that once channeled wagon trails now channels capital, and the same convergent geography that made it a crossroads in 1800 makes it one today. East Tennessee's cities, Knoxville, Chattanooga, stretch along narrow valley corridors between ridges, oriented along Appalachian lines just like they have been since the first settlers squeezed through the gaps. Tourism, higher education, and the Tennessee Valley Authority's legacy of hydroelectric power anchor the economy here. The settlement patterns are linear because the mountains demand it. Towns follow valleys the way water follows a channel. Each city's trade routes, infrastructure, and economic identity follow the geology of its grand division. Freight companies in Memphis, farmers in West Tennessee, and tech workers in Nashville all operate according to completely different logics of the land, and those logics reinforce separate regional identities even today. The grand divisions still run distinct economies: logistics and agriculture in the flat western lowlands, diversified industry and services around the Nashville basin, tourism and education in the Appalachian East. Statewide policy must constantly balance opposite regional needs, like a government trying to serve 3 countries at once. This is why outsiders who expect a simple red state are always wrong. Tennessee has never been simple about anything. Return to the opening image. Tennessee's long, thin shape stretched across 440 miles. Every state is secretly multiple states. Northern and Southern California, upstate and downstate New York, the Front Range and the Western Slope in Colorado. But most states paper over the divide with a single identity: a single story they tell about themselves. Tennessee never could. The mountains were too steep, the basin too separate, the floodplain too flat. The land refused to cooperate with a single narrative. 3 different landscapes hardwired 3 different economies, 3 different cultures, and 3 different political identities into the same 440-mile stretch of ground. And those differences did not soften with time. They sharpened. So Tennessee did something no other state has done. It stopped pretending. It wrote the division into law. 3 grand divisions, 3 stars on the flag, 3 Supreme Court seats. Highway signs that once welcomed you to the 3 states of Tennessee. Tennessee is not the opposite of every state because it is broken. It is the opposite because it is honest. Every state in America is fractured by geography, divided by economics, and pulled in competing directions by the land beneath it. Most states pretend otherwise. Tennessee put 3 stars on its flag and called it what it is. If you want to see how geography drew similar invisible lines through other states, check out one of the recommended videos on screen, and if you have not already, subscribe.